We now welcome our panel, Nancy Mahon, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the Estée Lauder companies, Sherry Madera, who is the CEO of CDP, and Sandra Uwera Murasa, who is the Global CEO for Fairtrade International. Please welcome them. Amazing panel, guys. This is a very exciting moment for me, certainly, to have you guys here. Thank you for coming. You've come from many different places, and you're here part of the energy. I'm going to, first of all, we've set the scene well with Vincent on his talking. We have 25 minutes, so we're going to go quickly and get into it. But before we start, I'd like each of you, please, just to introduce. And I'm going to start with Sandra. Just what do you do, and what does your organization do, and why are you here today?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for bringing us over. I was here yesterday, and I was very excited to see all the solution drivers in the room, sitting together as think tanks, as developers, and looking at the ecosystem that we live in and trying to put together solutions that can help us to make the world better. So it's a pleasure to be here, and that's why I'm here. I wanted to contribute to the discussions. So my name is Sandra Uwera. I work with Fairtrade International. I'm sure many of you know of our products. We are a global movement that represents 2 million producers around the world, and we are sourcing from about 1,700 producer organizations and selling to 71 countries. Our ethos, our narrative is to focus on social justice for producers. What does this mean? It means that when you're buying a Fairtrade certified product, you are giving back to the producers at the end of the supply chain, at the grassroots level. You're ensuring that a producer has a Fairtrade minimum price. A producer is able to get a premium that helps them to build their national ecosystem and strengthen their livelihoods in the space of adding more to their living income, building more on their living wages, and also helping them to become more sustainable within the ecosystems that they're operating in. And that's what we do. Amazing. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that in the context of data, transparency, and trade.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Nancy.
I'm Nancy Mann. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Estée Lauder Companies. We're a large beauty, fragrance, and makeup company. We're here to learn. We've really focused heavily on climate. And one of the pieces that we really focus on is how do we, as a large company, leverage our scale for solutions. And the bottom line, with all the great noise behind us, which I got to visit yesterday, is we don't have all the solutions at the right scale to hit our goals. And so we're here to learn. I also represent 42,000 employees, many of whom we have here today. We want everyone's job to be a climate job, and that business of embedding is a big piece of my job. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Great. Sherry.
Great, thanks, James, and thank you for letting me be part of such an exciting panel. I'm Sherry Madera. I'm the CEO of CDP. I'm 6 months into this role, but the organization itself is 23 years strong. And essentially, CDP created the climate data ecosystem. It is the organization that first started asking questions about disclosure and transparency. So a super proud and honor for me to be leading this organization going forward. We now represent over 2/3 of the world's market cap. Over 85% of the S&P 500 report to us. We have incredible growth rates in terms of disclosure, not only in developed markets, but excitingly in Asia and in some of the global south. So again, we're very much in line with what was said before, and we're looking forward to make sure that data isn't just about data for data's sake. Data has got to be used. We need to think about the use cases and how the actions really bring a more Earth-positive planet.
So thank you, Sherry. And that kind of whole idea of data for action is really, really important. So Nancy, give us a kind of...
No, it's a great point, and we work very closely with CDP, so glad to be on the panel with you. At the end of the day, what we really want the data to be is not only to transparently report, but to manage. And so shifting from reporting data to managerial data so that we have real-time KPIs within the business. So for instance, the folks in supply chain that decide whether something is going to be air shipped or freight shipped, for them to understand the carbon impact of that. I think the other thing to remember is is we really need to harmonize our reporting systems.
Yeah.
Because the bottom line is the folks on our team, I was talking to Sherry before, who are reporting on water or reporting on climate, are also doing the actual work within the company. And so harmonization is very, very important as we look across these various indices. And then lastly, it really should be, for companies like ours, it is a very humbling journey to achieve our climate goals. And so what we want to do also is remain open and remain honest about what is going well and what isn't going well, and making sure that we have an environment where we're able to do that.
And you're in a transition, effectively.
We're all in a transition,
all the time, right?
Absolutely.
And so you're driving that, and business as that force for transition is so important.
Absolutely, and like most companies, about 95% of our footprint is our supply chain, and so this ability to work with CDP, for instance, and have a third party collecting data that we can use for Scope 3 as well as our competitors is critically, critically important. And again, having data that means something to your frontline teams and incorporating that into their job in, candidly, a fair and accurate way is critically important, and that's why we're so glad to be here.
Brilliant. And Sandra, you have, I mean, you're right at the tough end of the supply chain, right, with your producers and your responsible sourcing. I mean, for me, it feels like sometimes almost impossible to understand how that's all going. How are you using data? Give us a little perspective from your point of view, and remind me how long Fairtrade has been around, because I seem to remember your mark on products for many, many years.
Well, we've been around, we've been in the market for about 30 years. We are driven by producers. Producers are at the center of our business models, and especially in this case, data. But just to touch on what you're asking, in terms of access to data, we recognize, especially this year as part of our growth targets, that data is really core to helping us tell the stories of producers out there. But most importantly, we believe data governance is very important because data has to be used responsibly. So one of the programs that we have done, I'll give an example of the cocoa sector in West Africa, is that we have, since 2019, we've been working with the cocoa sector to set up information management systems. As you're well aware, not every farmer will have a very keen understanding about how to input data into very sophisticated, intricate systems. So we have worked very closely with partners on the ground, in this case FarmForce, where in 2022 we set up an information system where we're able to collect data from farmers at the producer organization level and trace cocoa to the first mile farmer. We've been able to translate this information within FarmForce to provide predictive analysis of some of the inherent challenges and the risks that they're facing on the ground. As you well know, we're right now operating in an ever-evolving regulatory landscape that's looking at where we have the EUDR, the EU Deforestation Regulation, and the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Regulation coming into play. So right now we're using this data to be able to inform our companies, our corporates, our customers, and our consumers about the inherent risks on the ground and how we're setting up programmatic approaches to address those risks. So where there's deforestation, we are addressing those risks by setting up a programmatic approach on dynamic agroforestry, where we're intercropping in those particular lands to create more climate resilient products that we can sell locally, even as we sell cocoa internationally. And these are just a few of those examples. So that's how you can take data into action.
That's amazing. And when we have our cup of coffee or cup of cocoa, remember who's picked who's been there behind it. And we often think about last mile. We talk about it the whole time, last mile delivery. But what about that first mile and the person who's at the end of that? And we are all humans in the end, and there's humans at the other end of it. So it's very important. The other thing I picked up on is data governance. There's one thing having data, but it has to be governed properly. Yeah. Moving swiftly on to regulation, Sherry, give us a perspective on kind of how regulation is affecting this traceability, transparency kind of topic.
Yeah, thanks. I think that actually we can kind of get fixated on regulation because obviously it's a great big stick. and companies and corporates start thinking about, and Nancy and many others, we're talking about this, how is it that we're prepared for this, especially here in the EU, who is at the vanguard of thinking about disclosure as becoming very much in the foreground of thinking about regulation and compliance. But the reality is, James, that actually the same data that's being used for compliance, for disclosure, for transparency, is the same data we use for action. So Nancy talked about the supply chain, and Sandra was also speaking about how you go into that last mile and you pull all that information right up into you as a use case, you as a consumer, a business as how they're using all of these products and the disclosure that comes before. Yes, that's scope 3, right? If we're going to start getting technical about it, about why we're disclosing. But the reality is you can reach back into that supply chain, use the data, start saying, how is it that we can make this better? What action can we work together on through the data to be able to create targets, to create incentives that are real incentives for those that are disclosing and move it through? So compliance is only one piece. The way I look at it, try and keep things simple. Data can get complicated. The reality is that there are only 3 ways of actually a CFO or a CEO or a board to think about climate and nature data. They need it for access to capital. Increasingly, the capital markets are needing this information. Increasingly, we're seeing from CDP, the private markets are needing this information. Access to capital, really essential. The second is business efficiency and your own use cases. Attracting, retaining talent. They want to know this data, not just in words, but in fact. And they also need it for supply chain, thinking about how your procurement decisions are being made, how you make that efficient. So access to capital, business efficiencies and use cases, and finally that compliance piece. Let's keep it simple. It's the ABCs of climate and nature data. And I think that when you pair that with the concept of writing that data once and using it many, then we create an efficiency that is going to be able to drive this ecosystem forward to not focus only on thinking about getting that reporting right, but getting the use of that data right. Because every dollar that's spent on reporting is a dollar we can't spend on action. And we all have to be as efficient as possible. So that's why CDP is trying to step up there globally to create comparable data that's used for many.
Amazing.
Can I say
please.
amen?
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
So fully agree with those points. I think the other, when we talk about data governance, again, what we really want to do is be able to have operational managerial data. And that's because if you look at the environmental space and the social space, if you're just focusing on climate, you might miss with regard to plastics. And so also creating teams across the matrix that are able to work with one another around these issues. I just wanted to pick up on the availability of capital issue. I spend about 1/3 of my time with investors, and glad to see you have investors here. The bottom line is climate risk is financial risk. And what's helped us, candidly, in the movement is the notion that climate data should have the integrity that financial data has. And while that's a very high standard, what we've seen is many of our investors have portfolio climate goals. You'll see at the end of our CNS report, we have pages and pages of data. And while the other stories are very important, as are the pictures and the employee engagement, what's really important to investors are those numbers. And again, the more we can move towards harmonization and understanding of climate risk as financial risk, the better we will be. Another point that Sherry made around employees. We've done employee surveys, and the most important environmental issue to our employees, climate. And of that, green buildings. So what I would also encourage you to understand that change starts at home. Yep. You should think about yourself. What are you actually doing in your home life? What are you doing as an employee? Because at the end of the day, if you look at these Scope 3 goals, the only way we are going to get there together is if every employee in every company mobilizes themselves at home. And also, I'm so impressed with the entrepreneurism here. We also need intrapreneurism. How do people within these large companies like ours that are able to spend funds on climate, how are they inventing the next solution and piloting some of the solutions you see behind us?
Amazing. And as a fact, something you said, spending 1/3 of your time with investors. So, the chief sustainability officer. That's great progress, because that's where the money is, right? So,
oh, absolutely.
It's fantastic to hear that.
Yeah, and also you are all investors. You're retail investors.
Yeah.
Really, the evolution that we've seen in the field is we have more investors, women, and we have more young people.
Yeah.
And so even if you're in a quote unquote passive fund, take a look at what you are investing in for your pension and make sure that it aligns with your values. And when you buy products, educate yourself. The professionals' presentation around climate, critically important. For companies like ours, you are essentially voting with your wallet. So make sure that you understand the values of the companies that you are buying their products. And then lastly, I do want to give a shout out to our retail partners. Sephora is here doing some wonderful work. More and more and more, we are seeing how does climate, how does purpose show up at retail? How do we talk about this work in a meaningful way to you all as you are purchasing? And I would say encourage your retailers to do that and ask questions as you're purchasing.
Couldn't agree more. And it's this agenda as a value creator and as an attractor for customers. And Sandra, you'd have a perspective on how the Fairtrade mark plays with customers and consumers, and how are you seeing customer evolution on this agenda?
Thank you for that question. First of all, I want to just say, Nancy, you reminded me of a term. Digitalization is about the merger of business and technology. And when we think about it in that context, you actually see how we use digitalization to push forward capital, investments, and market share. It's quite, you brought that, I remembered that. So in our case, we look at core market access for efficiency. One of our key interests is strengthening traceability so that we're able to tell customers, our corporate companies, and consumers about what is happening on the ground and how they can make strategic investment decisions within the distribution channels and the supply chains to build more, to taper commercial interest with development agendas. We do this through our flow sort identifier. This is a 4 to 7 digit code, or in some cases, depending on the market preferences, we have a QR code that helps you to trace, that helps you to scan the code and get to understand some of the challenges on the ground, or just even have a serial overview of how your investment within the supply chain is beneficial for the producers and also helps to build a better quality product that is being sold in the market. So when you scan, when you input this 4 to 7 digit code, our flow ID, you're able to see the schematics of the production chain. You're able to see storage facilities in some of our flower farms. You're able to see the protection mechanisms we have set up through our higher labor standards. You're able to see health and safety requirements at work. You're also able to see gender representation, how we ensure that our standards apply gender representation in the workplace and also strengthens good working conditions. Beyond that, I'm sure many of you have bought Fairtrade flowers. Next time you do, please look for the QR code and you'll be able to access a virtual flower farm tour. This gives you access to understanding how we have used premium investments within the ecosystems of the flower farms in Kenya, as an example. And through that, you're able to see our parking systems, our storage systems, our water storage systems. You're able to see how we use greenhouses for the flowers. You're also able to understand the nature of the people behind the flowers, the hired labor within the flower farms and how they're operating and what they're benefiting from through the premium. So we look at data as a way of improving market efficiency and bringing our customers and consumers closer to the bottom of the supply chain. And that's why it's very beneficial.
And I love the fact that you're telling stories. Yes. You're telling a story which is very compelling. I mean, great brands like in your company, Nancy, they're storytellers, aren't they? They're telling stories, they're creating that, the aura around the product, which is driving consumers. I just want to say there is also a massive difference between fair trade and non-fair trade. And it's not ideal what's going on in some of these supply chains. So being able to have confidence, and my next question is, Nancy or Sherry, is do we bring some of that information to consumers in a more kind of, some of this data coming through in the way that Sandra is talking about? Is that coming through? Are you doing that?
Yes, we focus a great deal on the communities where we live, work, and source. And Sandra's point about the communities where products are coming from is critically important. And one of the potentially, I'd say, negative effects of some of the regulation is that we might eliminate local business. And so, for instance, around palm, we use a fair amount of palm oil, not as much as the food industry. But what we've done is partner with Business for Social Responsibility to work with the women, they're primarily sourced by women, and increase their sort of financial literacy. And so I think it's very, very important that we do, as Sandra said, understand where these products are coming from and who are the people. How can we connect, to your point, James, the consumer and those communities, and that we respect and we grow those local industries, and we clarify some of the invisibility in the supply chain.
Yeah, brilliant.
And of course, I would say the invisibility, Nancy, comes with trying to find a reasonable amount of data. And I'm saying that again, a reasonable amount of data. You know, we work globally. I have had the pleasure in the last 6 months of talking to 350 of the world's largest supply chain members, either directly or indirectly. And there's a huge amount of reporting burden that goes on. So as we're starting to think about more data, I'd encourage us all to think about how it is that we're using that data. And partnering with our friends at Estée Lauder, maybe what we need to do is really think about each of those data points and how it is going to give insight and lead to action before we start asking for it. And again, that's something that we're working closely with policymakers globally in order to make sure that there is an efficiency that goes on there as well. Because we're not only just talking about climate data. CDP has been collecting data on water and forests for over 10 years. Now, arguably, that was before much of the world was understanding where and how that was being used. Well, now that is actually very much mainstream when you're thinking about nature. How is it the effects and impacts on nature? Things like the Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures are now becoming something that people are talking about. And again, if you're talking about it, you've got a principle for it. If you've got a principle, you're starting to develop frameworks. Then you go into the world of standards. And here we are, CDP, to try and make sure that that translates into real data, into data that actually can be reported, that there can be confidence in, that there can be comparability in, and that it is being used. So again, if we can start making sure that that becomes our bottom basement, that we're going to try and make more efficient this entire market so that we can accelerate that.
So I'm just going to, the terrible red numbers are coming on, so we have only 4 minutes left, and I want to just let you, each of you, just have a couple of closing remarks. It's just going into the helicopter. We're in this amazing place, and we're all here for the sort of same reason. But when you look out, and you look out at what's going on in the world, two things to maybe think about in your closing remarks. One is, how do you feel? Do you feel positive? How are we doing? And then secondly, what would you like the audience to take away from you? Just one thing. And I'll start, Sandra, with you, please, and then come back along.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I'm naturally a very positive person, so I'm optimistic about the solutions we're bringing to the table, and we'll put them into action. I have two calls for action. The first one is data responsibility. I'd like to encourage all the corporate companies here in the room that when you access data, use it to reinvest back in your supply chains and build more capacity. Commercial interests must be tempered with development, and it's important that this discussion is had at a shareholder level, where we don't just think about short-term profits, we had a discussion about this last night, but long-term returns of investment. So please use that data to build more capacity at the grassroots level, especially where products are coming from. The future of food lies in how you decide how to use data to build more within your supply chains. And then secondly, it's important that we bring all our multi-stakeholders to have a system-wide approach about data governance, data use, and data action. This is a conversation that just can't be had by one part of the ecosystem. We really need to think about it holistically, and we need to think about it with the producers, the farmers, and workers at the center of those discussions, because they do own the data is coming from them, but it's important that we also build their capacity to understand how they can use that data back into strengthening their businesses and making them more competitive, and also promoting decent livelihoods at a grassroots level. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Sherry.
I think my take-home point would be that disclosing climate data is not a nice-to-have. It is a must-have for your core business. If you're a small business, if you're a large business, if you're a multinational, increasingly you are going to lose clients, you're going to lose investors, and you're going to lose talent if you're not aware of what you can measure with your own disclosures. Because what you can measure, you can then manage.
Amazing.
Fully agree. Very important to measure and manage. I think the other. I spent a great deal of time in the AIDS movement, and I remember one of the great leaders said to a very large room like this, "We will look back and we will say, what did we make of this moment?" And that's the moment we're in. And so, as a big company that's successful, we need your help. We need your help understanding that we are trying to be more transparent. We're not perfect. We're on a journey, but also to help us, I would say, in terms of your consumer choices. Buy from companies that are climate friendly and become part of the movement. And as an employee, come to your CSO, or if there isn't a CSO, go to your head of supply chain. How is it that I can be part of that movement? And again, for me, the biggest question now is we do not have enough solutions on the table, and we do not have scale. And so whatever your background, if you're an expert in scaling, then help us pilot at companies like ours these solutions. And thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Amazing. Thank you. So, look, I mean, I have 48 seconds to try and sum all that up. I mean, we could probably spend a long time having this conversation. The inspiration that comes from your leadership, all of you, in what you're doing is so important, so critical, and so powerful. And it's been eye-opening for me, and I feel very encouraged, actually, from this panel. And I think we can all go out and we can help scale. You know, if we can help scale, then this can be solved, and the moment is very, very important. So
look at the scale in the room. Thank you all for being here.
Exactly. So thank you all, and Nancy, Sherry, Sandra, great pleasure to have you. Thank you.